Hey, welcome to the second episode of the Thinklings podcast, a podcast where we explore the intersections between imagination, fellowship, and coffee. Three things that I think we can all agree on are needed in this world and that there are never enough of. I'm your host, Randy Hardman. I'm super excited today to have as our second guest on this podcast, Winfield Bevins. Dr. Winfield Bevins, actually. He is the director of church planting at Asbury Theological Seminary, author of several books, including Ancient Ever New and Marks of a Movement, and the co-director, is that the right term, for Healthy Rhythms Coaching?
Co-founder.
Yeah. Co-founder, yeah. Well, when there's only two people involved doing the coaching stuff, yeah, co-director, co-founder.
Yeah.
But we also know him as just a longtime friend, but also the artist collaborator with us, I guess, artist in resident for Drinklings Coffee, the mugs side of our operation. So if you've been following us since late 2016, you probably have a couple of Winfield's drawings in your cabinet. And I think we started in a little coffee shop, ironically, where we were conceptualizing this before we had any plans of doing coffee, and we were just going to be Drinklings mugs. And Winfield graciously drew up a C.S. Lewis, a Saint Drogo, which I think really was a Saint Patrick, but we called him the Saint Drogo, and then changed that later, and a Tolkien, which we can no longer sell, but there you go. So just super excited to have you on the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. I think I've got we could call it the bootleg Tolkien.
The bootleg Tolkien. It's still in some people's cabinets, but
yeah.
The bigger the name, the harder it is to work with some of that. But and this is the second time we've done this podcast. The first time we did it, actually, a couple of weeks ago, I failed to hit the record button. So hopefully this comes across pretty organic, but still a good second run through. So you and Mark Dunwoody, who is my favorite Irish person in the world. I only know like 3 Irish people too, so sorry to them. Wrote this book, Healthy Rhythms for Leaders, Cultivating Soul Care in Uncertain Times. And you guys wrote this in 2020, 2021. I think it came out 2021. Yep. So kind of in the midst of COVID. And I think you guys started this before COVID, but then as that started to happen, and then we started to move through that, you realize how applicable this is. And so I just would love to know from your side, and, as far as you can talk from Mark, what was it that you were seeing amongst leaders that was kind of, starting to stir this book?
Yeah, I mean, Mark and I have been working for several decades independently. He's in Ireland. He's been working in European context. I work with a lot of global leaders with my work at Asbury. And we both just kind of shared a passion and a heart for leaders. Leadership burnout was a thing before the pandemic, and one of the things we really kind of connected around. And in 2017, we were at a conference together in the north of England and ended up kind of doing a tour went to Whitby Abbey, Durham Cathedral, spent the night in Durham. And then we ended up on Lindisfarne Island, and which is where St. Aidan came from, Iona, and established kind of the North Mission that really reached through the whole of England. It's really quite amazing. And I think we were really impressed with kind of the spirituality of Aidan and those monks. The Lindisfarne Island becomes an island twice a day. Like the tide rolls in and it becomes an island, and it's separated from the world. And then when the tide kind of goes back out, then it connects back to the mainland. And that really formed their spirituality. And it's kind of what we call ebb and flow spirituality, where we kind of retreat to be with God so we can kind of go back out into the world and live out our faith and, out in the real world. But there's this ebb and flow where we have to have these rhythms. And we were just inspired to kind of do something together on that, while we were there. And so we started collaborating literally. I say it was just providential. It's like right before the pandemic. I remember we were kind of just dreaming, about kind of what we would do together to help leaders. We were talking about coaching, and literally we were working on this project, and you kept hearing in the news, this pandemic, it spread from, in Asia, and I was going to go to Singapore, and the next thing you know, there were cases, in Spain and England, and then it hits here. And so we were really working on this, and so that was really profound. So the book in many ways kind of came out of our own, one, just burden for leaders, but two, just our own, the space, and seeing the increasing need for leaders to get healthy rhythms. So it kind of grew out of that. It was a real interesting kind of convergence of things.
And I like, I mean, you're a beach guy. I'm a beach guy, but I like the analogy of the waves and the ebb and flow. And I think that's one of those things that, we really were starting to recognize the necessity for that pre-COVID.
Yep.
In the midst of COVID, we, a lot of people kind of pulled back, but there was a good structure of our society that was also having to, grind, for the next couple of years. And we're kind of cold, as a community, small communities, large communities, and a nation, even the world, just coming out of so much. And I think this question of like, what does ebb and flow look like is, really, really necessary. Our whole world has gotten shaken up. I think about the beach, and it's almost like, if you've ever been in the beach where it's just like, you just keep getting knocked down wave after wave after wave. And eventually you're just like, I can't find any rhythm in this. And so finally you just retreat to safety. And part of the challenge is, getting beyond the break, getting beyond the waves that are crashing, and getting into that deeper part of the ocean where it is more rhythmical. That's
right. And I think so. That was the other thing, Mark and I kind of connected, right? He grew up in Ireland on the coast. We raised our family on the Outer Banks, which is a stretch of islands on the coast. And so kind of the rhythms of the sea and just the rhythms of the seasons really formed us and shaped us and really kind of spoke into that. So that's kind of what we mean by rhythms is, oftentimes leaders are so outwardly focused, and focused on external things like vision casting, numbers, bottom lines, budgets. And, it's kind of like Jesus said, what does it profit a person if they gain the whole world but lose their soul? And when you look at great Christians throughout the ages, there's this ebb and flow rhythm, this back and forth of retreating to be with God, to go back out into the world and to be effective, to be an effective leader. You see this in the life of Jesus. You see this in the life of, again, the saints. Jesus, oftentimes we focus on the miracles at the expense of all these just one-liners, if you will, sprinkled throughout the Gospels where it says, and then he got up while it was still dark and went by himself to pray. He went off into the wilderness and his disciples had to go looking for him. And you see this even in the life of Christ, of this ebb and flow rhythm of just retreating to be with God, to be able to go do the stuff that we need to do. And honestly, man, this stuff has been what has sustained me over the last few years in the midst of all the craziness of this. And, even now, like, dude, as soon as we get off, I'm getting ready to go take a retreat for a couple of days. I'm out of here. Like,
same thing with us. I'm out on Tuesday to go to the beach and get some ebb and flow in our lives.
And you gotta do it. You gotta get those rhythms, and that's one of the things we look at. Like, there are daily rhythms, there's weekly, monthly, annual. You gotta have these cycles to keep yourself healthy. In your family, if you're married, if you're single, obviously you're really tending to yourself. If you're married and with children, then you're responsible for not just yourself, but a whole family. And so what do healthy rhythms look like? And those are important questions that we need to ask ourselves.
So one of the things that you kept hearing over the past 2 years, and you kind of still, hear it a bit today, is like this aspiration to get back to normal, right? Like the way that things were. And, as somebody who ran a small business, right, who got hit by COVID, we were regularly confronted with that question, is like, well, if you're at 50% occupancy, how do you get to 60? If you're at 60, how do you get to 70? If you're at 70, how do you get to 100? And there was a lot of panic for leaders in that, and churches, of course, would be the same. As all of a sudden you can't have anybody in your building, you're still responsible for your light bills and your electricity and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden you see the bottom floor drop out, and a third of people in churches, or if you're a business or an organization, a whole lot of your employees left. But there's still this temptation to be like, let's go back to normal. And yet I'm not so sure that there is ever getting back to normal. So for people that are kind of, developed around the way that things were, their habits are formed around that. That's now an old world. We're in a new world. How do we break some of those old habits, old expectations, old ways of doing things for, the new world that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I think this idea of rhythms, it's kind of like people had their rhythms before COVID, and a lot of the leaders I was coaching, I remember one young guy was like, he was was a church planner with a young family, and was like, dude, what do I do? Like, and he had to get in the car in the morning because they were homeschooling. This was early on, they were doing the virtual stuff with their kids. And he got in the car 8 a.m, drove down the street, turned around and came back home and worked from his back bedroom, to have a rhythm. Like, okay, this is, daddy's going to work. y'all do your thing. And it's kind of like everyone's had to find new rhythms that work and are healthy. And those that, some people, the instinct has been, as leaders, oftentimes, hey, let's grit and bear. Let's just kind of work hard through this. But no, the world has changed, and you have to find, new balance, a new way to live in new realities. And it's challenging. People have had to adapt. We've had to pivot. And it's, there are two skills that I talk about. One, it takes courage to realize, that we live in a new world, and it takes a lot of courage to, one, acknowledge that and to dare to do things differently. And then two, it takes a lot of humility to be able to adapt your life to say, okay, if I live in a new world, I need new rhythms. I need to adapt to this new reality. So I think courage and adaptability are two kind of resilient skills that leaders really need to develop.
And I think too, like, again, there's a bit of a pressure to say, as things get difficult, let's throw more at it, right? Let's throw more gasoline onto the fire, or let's come up with new ideas, or let's adapt and pivot and stuff like that. So when you're saying pivot, you're not always talking like, oh, let's find this new idea, because oftentimes leaders you think of streaming services, right? And how many small little churches, for example, set up YouTube live channels on Sunday mornings, right? And it was stressful for a lot of people that just don't understand technology and stuff like that, and still is. And where is that difference there between doing things differently and doing things healthy?
Well, again, I think, when we talk about this, we're kind of preaching to ourselves here. I think finding that balance of rest, work, play, family, friends, it is difficult, and it's one of those things that one of the things we get into is we have a whole chapter. One of the things we talk about is developing a rule of life, because otherwise it's all theoretical. We could talk about